Now you know that Deacon Bill and I usually focus on the readings when we're preparing our homilies. And also when I'm teaching about preaching, it's something that I tell people, you begin by meditating on the readings all week long, and you reflect on that and prepare. I'm saying that because John Kermit's here, and he should be doing that in these days. Got to be a good example. But I'm going to break that. Because one of the other options that is given to the preacher, and I've got to remember to stay up here. No, it's this thing and the bowl. Is the other option is that we can catechize on the season or on the liturgy itself. And I mentioned during an earlier homily that I intended to use my homilies during this Lenten season to talk about the works of mercy, the spiritual and the corporal works of mercy. Because this is what's been going through my head for quite some time now. We just spent the last 2 years in a whole synod process of reflecting on and talking about the synod of the family in the modern world, the family in today's context. What do we believe about that? How do we live it? And we finished that back in October and rolled right into the year of mercy. It's like, well, what? We just talked for 2 years. What? We just drop it and go away? I mean, what came of that? Well, typically it takes about a year or two before any documents or things come out of those things, because everybody needs to digest it and work at it and write and everything else like that. So eventually Rome will come out with something. But we don't have to wait for that. Now, the place to begin mercy, to experience it, to teach it, and to learn it is in the home. If we don't experience mercy growing up, we'll never know what it's all about. Basic principle. If we have never been forgiven, we will never know how to forgive. Very important. If we've never been loved as children, we will never know how to love as adults. So I'd like to devote my homilies during Lent to how do we, in family, live the corporal and spiritual works of mercy as a means of strengthening our family so that we become a context in which people can experience the truth of the gospel. And the first thing we all have to do is change our glasses. I don't mean switch over to contact lenses or something. To change the way we look at the world and the way we look at the gospel. You know, all of us growing up, probably the most common question we got at this time of year was, so what are you giving up for Lent? You know, Snicker bars. In my household, my father every year went on a diet, gave up potatoes and bread. Every year. So we all gave up potatoes and bread. Only way it's going to go. You know, and we ate fish. But I was living in the Catskill Mountains of New York. You know, fish for us meant Mrs. Paul's fish sticks. That's not what it means around here. Eating Mrs. Paul's fish sticks, that was penance. Eating calamari, not so much. You know, it's all a matter of context. And I remember talking to one of the kids when I was teaching, and he said, you know, Father, the church has gotten soft. You know, the Orthodox, they've got it tough. They have to give up dairy, and they have to give up eggs, and they have to give up meat. I said, yeah, that's fine. I can give those things up too if I'm living in Monterey, and I can eat oysters, you know, calamari, and great fish, and so forth. Yeah, no problem. But the church asks us to do something far more difficult. You want to hear a real tough Lent? Listen to what it is the church, back in the 1960s, began asking of us. That each of us should seriously sit down and, in the light of the gospel, determine what is it in my life that I must change in order to live the gospel more authentically. What is it in my life that I consider to be more important than the worship of God? What is it in my life that I consider to be more important? Who is the real God in my life? Face that and make a change. I'd rather give up fish and dairy much easier. That level of self-honesty, that level of self-introspection, that level of sitting down, if you're married with your spouse, and saying, how well do we really live that? And what should we do differently to be authentic? That's a bear. And whether we're single or married, whether we're living with friends or with family, to be that deeply honest. Who is the God you worship? If you're not, oh, of course it's Jesus. Really? Take a look at what Jesus says. The corporal and the spiritual works of mercy. Feed the hungry. Those of you that cook dinner at night, whichever one of you or whoever it is that does the cooking, or if you live alone when you cook, do you really see that what you're doing is an expression of your faith in God? Those of you who have people living at home, do you really see that when you sit down to prepare a meal, this is a privilege to be able to share the grace of God and the abundance of God's mercy through this meal? Even if it's just a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and a cup of tomato soup. Do we see that feeding ourselves, preparing a meal for ourselves, is an act of mercy as we express God's love in our own lives? I know it's hard sometimes. It's great, if 100 years ago when there was always a stay-at-home parent, a stay-at-home mom, and she spent the whole day in the kitchen. I don't think she always saw it as a privilege. But by the same token, I know many did. I know one of my two grandmothers did. She saw this as her way of feeding the world in her kitchen. Her way of living the gospel at her dining room table. She took the grand vision of life and reduced it to 8 chairs around the dining room table. What a way to see the world. What a way to see the gospel. That everything we do in our home, regardless of who is there, they're our family. And this is our family in this world, in this time, in this place. And we are called to feed the hungry, to give drink to the thirsty. You don't need to go down and work at Dorothy's Kitchen, although they always can use an extra set of hands. You can do it around your dining room table. You can do it sending your kids off to school. You can do it every place you go. If we do it at home first, and somehow or another feeding the hungry, feeding the hungers of our body, feeding the hungers of our mind, feeding the hungers of our heart, and responding to the thirst for care, compassion, forgiveness, and mercy, in a physical act of offering a drink of water, or a diet soda, or a beer, are all expressions of the abundance of God's love. It all depends on what we bring to it. It all depends on the lens that we wear, the way we see it. If we just see it here, go bother your father, Or driving downtown, here's $2, leave me alone. We miss the point. Yeah, you fed the hungry. Yeah, you gave drink to the thirsty, but you missed the point. That you and I, in this Lenten season, can express the gospel in physical means in our family first, and allow it to emanate out from there, so that together we can arrive at a joy-filled celebration of Easter, where we have experienced the mercy of God and expressed it as well.